So welcome everyone to to today's chat, in which I'm pretty excited to invite Devon to the show, and as usual, today we're gonna talk about language teaching, language learning, and um, what the best ways are to learn a language, to help our students learn a language as teachers ourselves, right? Comprehensible comprehensible input and many other things. So hope you all enjoy it, and let's get into it.
Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, Alvaro, for inviting me to your channel. I love talking all things language teaching and acquiring or learning, all the things that it has to do with being a good language learner and being able to use it in context in a meaningful way. So I'm excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome, of course. Because and before we get started, I just wanted to mention, like, because language learning doesn't have to be that complicated, boring process that we've all grown accustomed to suffering, right? That's the word.
Oh, no, definitely not.
Right.
Definitely not. It should be fun. It should be something that you're excited to get to every day because we fall into this trap, I think, as both language learners and as language teachers, because at at if you get the privilege of being a teacher at some point in your life for language, any language that you're working with, then you're also a learner at the same time to keep up your own skills. And if you're at any point feeling like you're teaching a history class or you're teaching something like a science class, or you feel like you fall into the traditional academic skills, then we've fallen astray at some point, because language. I always say that language is a skill, not a subject. It's a lot more
Mhm.
like our friends if you're teaching in a school building or if you're working with adults, no matter what realm you're in. It's far more like teaching somebody a sport or helping somebody learn how to make pottery or any kind of skill that they want to learn. It's really
Right.
not that academic at the end of the day. Um,
Hmm.
it's historically been taught that way for a host of reasons. That is an entirely different topic. But that when you like with the history of language teaching, which comes from the honor that we have for the classics traditions, Greek and Latin, but world languages and living languages are not like that. They're living, breathing things that are changing all of the time, and we have so much to work with that teaching them like an academic subject can honestly be a disservice to it. It's far more like a skill, something
Right.
that you got to do every single day in order to keep it up.
Right. 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 And I actually believe that works for every single subject, but that's a different topic, right? And so let's get into it. Before we get started, like everyone, if you have any questions throughout the entire stream, feel free to let us know. We'll be more than happy to answer them. And so Devon, tell us a little bit about yourself, especially when it comes to your language experience, both as a language learner and a teacher yourself.
Yeah, so I started being interested in languages. Well, it took a hold of me before I really even knew it. When I was a really little kid, when I was 2, my family was I was in a military family. My family was stationed outside of Osaka, Japan,
Oh,
and I was actually accidentally raised bilingually. I went to my mom didn't want me to go to an on-base school. She wanted me to take the opportunity to really be immersed in the culture and take as much of it in as I could, because it's a once in a lifetime experience to be 3 and live in another place. So I spoke English at home, and everywhere else around me was Japanese, and my parents did not speak Japanese, so the kids effectively became the translators, because we were immersed in it in everyday life, going to school, and all of our friends were Japanese and all that good stuff. So most of my first memories are in Japanese, and all of my first experiences with language, really like from 2.5 to 5, were in Japanese. Sadly, I don't speak it anymore because I didn't use it as soon as I came back to the States. But my first experience with language was that language was something that you used to make friends when you were a kid, that it was easy and it was fun, and that it was a way to experience something new, that like every time I stepped outside my door, like I was going to experience something new by using a new language. And so it was always really exciting for me. But then of course you come into that whole process of, I used to know a whole language and then forgot it as soon as I stopped using it, sparked all this curiosity of, how does this whole deal work? What's going on with this? And what can I do in order to keep this skill up? And it wasn't really, it died down for a while. When I was a kid, I didn't really think about it that much. It just slowly faded from my memory as I grew up. I just had a lot of fond memories of living in Japan and going through school. I didn't really need it anymore. Being American, it was English in schools all of the time. And then when I was 11, I went to a summer camp that was on the border of Canada and the United States near Maine. And there were a lot of French speakers there. And so the spark came up again of, ooh, I want to know what they're saying, because I had a lot of French speakers who were in my cabin and I couldn't understand what they were saying to each other when they were gossiping and telling stories and singing songs. And I totally wanted to be in on it. So I took French the next year. And every year when I came back to camp, I understood more and more and more of what they were saying. So it was always something that I wanted to learn languages so that I could make friends and hang out with more people and participate in all the cool things that I saw going on around me. And so language was a really, really positive learning experience for me. And I was lucky enough to go to a really good school. We had a really strong language program, although, we didn't start till we were like 12 or 13. So, but what can you do? But I had a really positive experience growing up learning languages, to the point where I wanted to take on another one when I was in college. So I started being a French major when I was in college and loved every second of it, except for all the reading. I'm a big reader, but it was a lot. It was a lot of books and a lot of reading. And I wish that we could speak more the whole time. I always really wanted to speak more with my professors. And then I thought, I want to learn Spanish because I want to travel to Latin America and go to all these amazing places that are right next to me, cheap flights and beaches. Come on, amazing beaches. So I started learning Spanish, as well as being where I live in America, there's a ton of Spanish speakers. And I was the kid in Spanish class when I was in college that, since I was a French major and, French and Spanish are cousin languages, it came very easily to me. It was one of those classes I never had to study for. I would show up really disheveled, like 5 minutes late to class, and I wouldn't even have to think about it. And I would get an A for every single class. But I loved every second of it. And it was so much fun for me. And I would do extra studying and everybody was always asking me to, like, oh, can Devin be in my group? And, can I get some extra tutoring on the side? Like, I used to make my money in college doing all of this tutoring for languages and all of these things. And then I had this huge pivotal change when I decided, okay, this is clearly something I'm good at. I want to really pursue this and get serious about it.
Okay.
I want to be a language teacher, or maybe even go into the Peace Corps and use my language skills to do some good in the world. And I signed up for a study abroad program to really hone in on my Spanish, go to the Dominican Republic for 6 months and be completely immersed in it, live with a host family, all that good stuff. Beaches as well. Beaches were a big factor. And I remember getting all prepared for my trip and going to the New York City Embassy in the Dominican Republic Embassy in New York City, and sitting in the embassy waiting for them to fill out my visa. And they don't get a ton of visa applicants from the US, so they're always really excited to hang out with you and talk to you.
Right.
And as I'm sitting and drinking this tiny Dixie cup plastic, like plastic drinking cup of coffee that is like half sugar and half coffee. Like I don't even know if you could even call it that. It was the sweetest thing I've ever had in my life. But I already knew, like, wow, I feel like I'm in a whole different world just in this little embassy. I was already so excited to go. And they started turning to me and talking to me, saying, "Oh, like you're going to study abroad in the Dominican?" They switched immediately into Spanish and started talking to me in Spanish. And I didn't understand any of it. I didn't understand any of it. And this was I was a French major. I had taken at this point several Spanish college courses. I was doing Spanish extra classes on the side. I was tutoring. I was being paid to tutor other Spanish students. And I was crushed. I was mortified because I remember one of the embassy workers looking at me in the eyes and giving me this look and saying, ¿Tú crees que estás lista? Like, do you really believe that you're ready for this? I was mortified because I had no words for him. And I didn't even realize what he was saying until later, until he really slowed down and said to me, "Do you really think that you're ready for this?" Because he knew what I was getting into and I didn't. That Dominican Spanish, yeah, I mean, it's for those of you who are also Spanish learners, it has a reputation for being more on the difficult side just because it's very fast. There's a lot of syllables that get dropped at the end. But I mean, every country has their accent. Every country has their thing. But at the end of the day, it wasn't the accent. It had nothing to do with the cadence or the speech. It was the fact that this was probably maybe the third time that somebody who had spoken to me in a native cadence with an intention for a conversation. Like this was probably the third time in my entire learning career that I'd been exposed to that. So it was, and I didn't know that at the time, but I remember that feeling of, I don't know if I'm prepared for this. And it took me a long time to be ready for all of the things that came my way with a completely immersive study abroad experience, trying to learn Spanish and just navigate in Spanish. And my thoughts on that were definitely, it really hit home that that was true, that something was up when I went to Pucamaima, the big college there that's in Santiago, one of the big cities, and said, "Oh yeah, Cara, you say?" Yeah, same thing happened to me when you went to Spain. See, it doesn't matter which country you're talking about.
Exactly.
It happens no matter where you are. What I think it happens, every learner that I talk to has an experience like this. So if you felt this way before, you are not alone. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, about why that happens, because it's a phenomenon that happens to everybody.
Yeah.
But I felt really validated in that I feel like there's a disconnect when I went to go take the test to put you in placement courses. And I did really well on the placement test for Spanish and was able to get into a really decent level of completely immersive Spanish courses. They like stamped me for like, "Oh yeah, like you're really good." I wasn't even a Spanish major and did as well as the Spanish majors did on the test. But when I was speaking and talking with the other Spanish majors, I didn't have nearly the same amount of ability to understand what was going on in conversations as they did. So there is a huge disconnect in the language learning world between what happens on paper and the most, in my humble opinion, of course, but this happens to a lot of people and not just me, the most useful, most important, and most necessary skill for language, which is speaking. Like there's a huge disconnect between what we're able to actually produce on paper, what we're able to understand when we read books, and what happens when it's actually go time to get into a conversation with a native speaker, which is the goal, right? Like that's the main goal. There are, of course, 4 modes of communication. There are 4 modes of communication. There's interpersonal, which is that's like the hardest one to really practice in class. And that's why there's such a deficit for that exact like moment that a lot of us have as learners is that interpersonal, that time when you're receiving information from something or someone, whether it's signed or spoken speech, and then you have to respond to it. That's the goal for most people, where they want to improve, but also the hardest to practice. So if you've ever felt that way, that's probably why. And that's one of the reasons I started to fall in love with comprehensible input, as because it's not really a strategy, but it is a lens for how to teach and how to learn, because it focuses on that the most. And then there's interpretive, which is the easiest to practice. Interpretive is, of course, where you're receiving any kind of input and trying to figure out what it is. And then you have presentational. Presentational is great, and that's when you are giving somebody information, but they don't have to give you anything back. Like, you might be giving a speech or writing a post online, anything along those lines, like giving a tweet. So yeah, those are the modes of communication, and one is definitely slipping me.
You say 4?
Yeah, I did. I said 4, but I'm actually the ones I'm thinking of actually go into 3. My bad. There's 3. But the interpersonal one is the hardest one to practice, but it's also the one that you're going to want to use the most. So anybody who's out there who has felt the same way, this is one of the things that we should be focusing on the most, both as learners and as teachers, because it's the hardest one to practice, but it's also the most important one.
Yeah, that's your ultimate goal, right?
Yeah.
I want to be able to communicate in a real life scenario. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but back to your point, that what Kara said, that I was about to say that the same exact thing happened to me with English, actually. Like, I studied English in Spain for 15 years, I'd say, you know, between primary school, high school, and a little bit of college. And I could pass pretty much any grammar exam, but I just couldn't speak the language. It's that simple. I vividly remember welcoming international students to my city in Spain and just not being able to communicate with them. Like, and again, I would pass any grammar exam, but I just couldn't communicate. And you know, you talked about speaking not being a factor in traditional classes, but I'd also say that in your classes that you did so well because you enjoyed that particular process or whatever the reason, we don't get to listen to the language that much, actually, because we're just focusing on form, right? We don't get to listen to the real language. I mean, to real conversations and things like that. We just focus on form, on specific structures, which is a completely different process. It has nothing to do with the way the actual language acquisition process works, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's the understanding how the language works, the actual structure of a language can help you at the very, very last stage of refining your language. So it seems really backwards to spend most of your time focusing on that when it's not going to lead to the outcome that you're really looking for. It's like if you're trying to learn a sport, so you spend all of your time watching YouTube videos about how to do a particular move in that sport, maybe like how to do a soccer pass, instead of going out and doing the pass. Like, you need that muscle memory in order to make it happen. Or a lot of people in the United States as language teachers will compare it to driving, that if you're teaching language and focusing a lot on the structure of how the language works, what you're learning is how to put your engine together and then maybe take it apart in case it breaks on you. But that's not actually teaching you how to drive the car. Like, you don't actually need to know how your engine works in order to drive the car effectively. You might need to know how your engine works if you're in a jam, like if something breaks. That's incredibly useful. And it works like that with understanding the grammar, the syntax, the phonetics of a language. That's incredibly helpful when your car starts to break down in the conversation. You can rely on those to help you. but it's not the conversation itself. It's not going to drive you forward, and you don't actually need it. I mean, there are stories out there of people who learn the language that they're studying, practicing, whatever you want to call it, through very non-traditional means, maybe just being immersed in it. Some people even learn it who don't have a lot of means, will learn it from television, and people have done studies on it, and it is actually possible. I mean, with some setbacks, with some things that they're not quite able to do, but you can actually learn a great deal just from well scaffolded exposure to the language at the right time, even with very limited grammatical information. I mean, that's the way kids learn language too. L1 and L2 are not learned exactly the same way by any means, but we don't teach kids anything about grammar, and they know a vast amount of linguistic information that we do not teach them.
Yeah, but like they're not learned the same way, but the principle should be the same, right? Because that's a process that works 100% of the time with kids and the native language. Is for some reason we adults decided to try a different way.
Yeah, exactly.
But I'm curious about your experience in Japan. So how long did you stay there, or how old were you when you came back to the US?
I was there from age about 2.5 to 5.
Okay.
So my first language is English, and English is spoken exclusively in my house. And both my mom and my dad did not speak any other language besides English. But they decided to send me and all of my siblings to Japanese school, and we didn't have any kind of classes or extra anything with Japanese, but my mom knew that if she sent us to school that we would be fine, because she's a pediatric nurse practitioner, so she knows a little bit about how kids' brains work, and language development just from a pediatric perspective. So she knew that if we were in an environment and we were well taken care of with teachers, that we would find a way, and that we would be all right, and it would be really good for us. But the interesting phenomenon for all of us is that my oldest sister left when she was 10. So she went to school from age 8 to 10. She became, fluent is a very, it's a very tricky word in the language community. But she was fluent enough that she lived in a school environment and functioned really well in that school environment, and was able to communicate with friends. And she was also on a Japanese TV show, and she was on a secondary role on a Japanese TV show for a long time. So she's able to communicate very, very well in Japanese. But none of us can communicate in Japanese anymore. We haven't used it for over 20 years. And we didn't, because my parents didn't speak it, we didn't use it at all after we left, because the kids were the only ones who knew it. So I would love for someone to do a study on this, because I'm sure this happens pretty often with multilingual families. But this language is gone from our household now, and it's gone from our memories. Like we don't really know it anymore. I am now relearning Japanese through the almighty owl, through Duolingo, which is really fun. I just do it on the side, and the cadence feels really familiar to me. The sounds are really familiar to me, but it is so hard. It is so hard. It does not come naturally to me at all. And I used to speak the language. It does not come naturally to me at all. So I'm completely relearning it.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. When you lived in Japan, did you watch cartoons, or you talk to kids, right? And okay. So now, if you watch a cartoon, for example, you don't understand anything, or?
I understand enough that I remember certain words. I remember a couple things. Oh, I'm definitely gonna do that. And I really enjoy a lot of the culture that I remember. Like the food feels like home cooking to me, and things like that. But the language itself, I will tell you that there's the sound it triggers something in my head. It feels really much like I'm at home, kind of like background noise, but I don't know what it's saying, really. I really don't know what it is. And so I've been working to learn what the words are, but I've had to practice it like I would have had to start from scratch for any other language. And it's coming back fairly quickly, probably more if I were to start something that was maybe a similar level of difficulty for an English learner, like maybe Korean. But it's a really interesting phenomenon. I'd be interesting to see. It would be interesting to see if anybody else is in the same boat as that. But there is a common misconception that there are easier and harder languages, but this is actually not true. If you ignore writing systems, because writing systems do make a difference, but if you ignore writing systems, all languages are the same level of difficulty. However, depending on what language family that you are familiar with, like since I am an English speaker, which is a Germanic language, like German will come a little bit more naturally to me than something else will. That will feel easier to me than something like Arabic, for example. But all languages, because of the way that languages are structured, they're all actually the same level of communicability and the same level of ease or difficulty. They're all the same. It just depends on what you're familiar with.
Yeah, absolutely.
But for me, it's if I were to learn maybe Chinese or Korean, it would be the same level of difficulty for me, except that the sounds are, I would say, easier for me. The sounds are easier for me. But I'm very much a novice. I'm very much a novice.
Yeah, first of all, Kara, you saw that Kara talked about the Japanese channel, comprehensively put Japanese channel on YouTube. Is it Japanese with Asami, I believe, or is it a different one, Kara? You can let us know.
Cool.
Yeah.
I will be checking that out. Yeah, because that would be really fun to watch.
That's interesting what you were talking about, because, for example, out of the languages that I speak, English or Polish, because I live in the country, I use them on a daily basis. But there's others that I don't get to use as much. But I try to listen to every single one of the languages that I speak every day, so I don't forget about them.
Yeah.
But I'm actually curious about the whole phenomenon that you're talking about, because maybe it was a long time ago and you were a little kid, but I've always believed that you don't forget the languages. I mean, how to put it into words? You forget things, but if you've been fluent in the language, if you've been able to communicate in the language, it's going to take you less time to get back there, if that makes sense. By the way, here's a comment from Kara. Okay.
Oh, cool. Yeah. I will look at that. Thank you.
Different one. Yeah.
I found the same thing going on. So I have a 6-year-old, and since I'm passionate about languages, I was trying to help him. And oh yes, Kara, yes, thank you for the encouragement. I was trying to teach him Spanish because it's such a useful language where we live, and obviously it's an amazing language, as you know. But when he was 4 and 5, he took to it. He loved it. He loved speaking it with me. And then as he got older and I started being far busier with running my own business, I had a lot less time for it. So I kind of put it to the side. And a few months later, trying to go back to it, he wanted no part of it. And he actually didn't really remember anything that I taught him. So I saw the same thing happening to him that was happening to me, that even though he's a kid and it's a lot easier for children to just be little sponges with language, once they turn 7 to 8 is usually where things start to get a little harder. But don't let any of that sway you. The number one thing in language learning is always motivation, and always has been, study after study after study. But With him, I definitely saw that if I didn't keep up with it and use it with him on a daily basis, he forgot really simple things that we used to do all of the time.
Right.
And it happened pretty fast. It
Yeah.
happened really, really fast.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry to interrupt, but I'm thinking that sometimes because kids, like your kid in this case, or you being a kid with Japanese, because they're not worried about, sounding perfect, sounding native like, or they just want to communicate.
Mhm.
I'm thinking that we might think they're more fluent than they actually are. What I mean by that is with your kid, if you use Spanish with your kid and he understood, that might lead you to think that he's actually, I mean, that he knows the language, but he might need a lot more repetitions in order to actually acquire the language and be able to produce it himself. So the
Mhm.
fact that he was able to understand what you were saying didn't mean that he got to actually acquire the language yet. And that happens with us adults all the time, right? That we're learning a new language and we can understand a lot, I mean, a lot or way more than we can actually say, right? So we feel like we know something, but that doesn't actually mean that we can communicate in real life. And if you look at it, our ability to understand is always way ahead
Mhm.
of our community, our ability to talk, right? So I'm just shooting things out there. I don't know, but I'm
You're
thinking that
exactly
you
right.
might.
No, I'm glad that you said that because that's exactly what happens too if you're a teacher in class is that the average number of repetitions that's accepted for what we know right now, it could change, is anywhere between 75 to 100 to 25 repetitions depending on the phrase. And
Mhm.
that's just so that it sticks, not even so that you can produce it. So imagine how many times that had to happen in
Right.
order for that word to really, really stick. Like that's really the power of the immersive environment is the number of repetitions, not necessarily
Yeah.
the immersion itself. It's just that it's literally just the amount of exposure that you're getting.
Yeah, yeah, every day, the whole day, right? Yeah, but I'm actually thinking about kids and the native language as well. Like when they're, I mean, you probably remember with your kid when he was a year old or 6 months old, he could understand a lot of English, but he didn't say anything,
Mhm.
right? So the fact that he could understand this much doesn't mean that he can understand, he can actually communicate. But we accept that with kids because we know it's not time for them to start speaking yet, right? But for some reason, as adults, we try to communicate pretty much from day one,
Mhm.
almost. But that's what the traditional approach tells us because we believe, once we learn a specific rule or a specific words consciously, we should be able to actually produce them, which is not true. We know that, of course. But the bigger problem with it is, um, when you think you should be able to communicate and you can't, not because there's something wrong with you, because it just doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
What's the only variable left? You're still thinking it should be me, right? That I'm not good at languages, that I'm not talented at languages, that it's never going to work with me, right? And that's why so many people think they're not talented for languages. And I just I just don't want that to happen because I've felt the frustration myself with English, as I talked about before, like for real.
Mhm.
And now it's just like comprehensible input and understanding how the process actually works has changed my entire life. And I speak several languages now. I enjoy every single minute of it. And yeah, and I think this is an important insight here for Kira.
Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we're conscious about it when we hear a specific word. Kara, I'm sure you can relate to this. We're watching a documentary, we're reading a book, whatever it is. We understand a specific word. I'm just going to talk about a specific word, but we understand a specific word. But we try to remember it, right? So like we just don't focus on understanding what's going on, which is what we should do, by the way. But I know it's hard. But if you look at kids, when they're 1 year old, you tell them, where's the car? And they don't try to say it. They just point at it or they move towards it. They just let you know that they understood what you said. But we adults, for some reason, we try to consciously remember those words. And when we can't, again, because that's not how it works, we feel frustrated and we beat ourselves up, right? And I remember this happened to me all the time, even with languages that I can perfectly communicate in. I would be watching series and trying to consciously recall the specific words that a character used, right?
Mm-hmm.
What did he say? What expression did he use? And I wasn't enjoying the series as much. And now I've learned to relax and just focus on understanding the message, understanding what's going on, because I know with enough repetitions of that specific word or structure in context, sooner or later it's just going to stick here.
Mm-hmm.
Don't tell me how the process when it comes to neurons actually works, but it works that way, and it's just so much more relaxing, and you get to actually enjoy every single minute of it, like I said, and every activity you're part of.
Mm-hmm. And even more to speak to your point, 2-year-olds have maybe 4 or 5 words at their disposal, maybe 4 or 5. So it takes 2 years to really even until you even get to that language explosion. Like at 18 months is when you can expect your baby to even say their first word. And then after that, like 2 years is when all of a sudden it just, you get an explosion of words. And then I promise you after 2.5 years, like you'll never get them to shut up again after that. But for adults, even though L1 and L2 learning is not exactly the same process, we have a lot to learn, exactly as you said, from children, as they are looking for meaning in everything that happens. They're not focusing on specific words because they are looking for the meaning. And to even prove this point, I think it's really interesting to pay attention to these specific pieces of acquisition that we've found to be true. Like this is why you should, whether you are either teaching or learning or doing both right now, why you should relax a little bit on the structure, or like leave it behind altogether if you can. But that's not flexible for everybody. That what both L1 and L2 learners learn first are the things that happen the most often in speech. So what I mean by that is they learn their verbs. Think about how often we learn verbs in just this order. We're going to learn present tense first. Now we're going to learn present progressive. Now we're going to learn past tense. Then we're going to learn irregular past tense of a verb. Now we're going to learn, if you're a Romance language or even sometimes in English, we're going to learn subjunctive. Now we're going to learn past subjunctive. Now we're going to learn future. Like we learn grammar as if it's linear. But people who are learning language in real time as a real language in their L1 or L2 learn it usually in this order in English, just in English. They first learn progressive INGs, because in English, that is so outrageously common and easy to hear. They learn INGs first. Then they learn past tense. I did. I went. And then they learn like the ED of anything that you can make a past tense in for ED. And then they learn third person present tense. Like that's what happens next. So people learn, or you could say they acquire, and it sticks in their brain. You can look it up. It's called The Orders of Acquisition. It's like my favorite thing ever, by Brown in the 70s. That people will learn in order the stuff that happens the most frequently and is the easiest for them to notice in their language, no matter whether it is their first mother tongue or their second language. They learn it in the order that they can hear it really easily, and it's really, really frequent and really relevant to the conversation. And usually it comes in action words and verbs, because that's like the most relevant thing to a learner. Like that's what the sentence is about. Like that's talking about the direction of things. And then those high content words like nouns, they don't have nearly as much of an order, even though we like to teach those first. Usually those things like colors and easy to pick up words like books and pencils and supplies and all those things. Learners actually learn verbs first because they use them the most, because they have the most meaning, and because they are used the most in speech. So the stuff that you're gonna, when you crack open a book, or when you're looking at any kind of learning program, that I've like 90% of the time, when you're opening a learning program for a language, most of the time it's going to teach you a couple like content words, nouns, and things like that. And then it'll teach you verbs in that order, like, present, past tense, subjunctive, all that good stuff. But that's not actually how you learn things. Like you learn things in the order of how frequent they are and how much they're used in speech. Look for meaning. Meaning is what is really going to get you far in both teaching and learning. Like it's all about context.
Right. Yeah, because it's going to happen naturally. When you talk to your kid, you're going to use the most common structures and words naturally without even paying attention, right? And the other thing is just a completely made up system that I don't really know who came up with it. But I was gonna say I love to know. I love to meet that person, but not really.
Yeah, indeed.
But yeah. I mean, I guess when it comes to verbs, the idea behind it was to start with the easiest thing from a conscious standpoint. Right? Which, back to your point, has nothing to do with how the actual process actually works. But, since the present tense is usually more simple than past tense, so, we just go about it that way. But yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And I have so many examples of native speakers in their own native language not knowing what specific terms they're using, and
all the time.
Like,
yeah,
everyone's like people learning Spanish. Everyone's favorite is the subjunctive that you talked about. So many times people ask me, "But why do you use it there?" I'm like, "Because it sounds right." And again, we're going to a little experiment here live again. I always ask my native English speaker friends all the time, do you know what a phrasal verb is?
No. I have no idea.
I mean, if everyone watching is a non-native English speaker, they perfectly know what I'm talking about. We all get that in traditional classes. For native English speakers, that's those verbs followed by a preposition like go on or go ahead or break up, things like that.
Oh, that's hilarious. Nope.
You know what and you're a teacher, so right? So I'm always asking every single native English speaker that I meet that question, and nobody knows what it is. Nobody.
And to make you even feel better too, like if you are an English speaker in the United States, we usually don't learn any piece of grammar of how our own language works until about age 13 or 14. Like we don't usually do that until it's time for us to write and learn how other people write masterworks and books and things like that.
Right.
And it's time for us to prep for our college entrance exams. That's when we start doing it, really.
Right. And I'd even argue that those who more successfully understand the grammar in the native language, it's not so much about the actual classes that they get, but how much reading they've done in the free time, for example. Because that's an argument that I hear all the time. Like, yeah, okay, so I get it that consciously studying grammar is not that important, but in our own native language, finally we study grammar, and I always think about the fact that I don't think it's that helpful actually, because it's easier to measure, right? Because
Mhm.
when you're a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, it's harder to measure how much those stories that your mom told you contributed to your success, or to you acquiring the actual structures of the language, right?
Mhm.
Because you cannot really measure that. You can't say, okay, so mom read this specific book to me last week, so I got this much better, I got this knowledge. You can't really measure that, right? But I'm pretty sure that the actual grammar classes we get in our native language are not helpful at all. And I'm thinking about my own case, and I've been thinking about this recently. There's only one thing I remember from Spanish grammar classes, and that's where to place those little markers that we have in words, or
Oh
I don't
yeah.
even know what you call them, which obviously has no impact in speaking at all, but only in reading or writing, right? And I'm pretty sure the reason why I write in Spanish perfectly, I don't make any mistake like that, is because I love reading, not because of those classes, you know. But
Yeah. Very true.
yeah, one second, yeah, we got a question from Kara. How do you guys convince students to switch to using CI? Hmm. Or to just listen and read? I have a couple of ESL students that don't trust it and are always asking me grammar questions that I don't want to answer. Hmm.
Oh, such a good question. Such a good question. Okay, so
Go,
for
go ahead. Yeah.
it depends on the age of your students. If you're working with ESL, you could be in all different realms, right? So, Kara, if you get a chance, tell me how old your kids are. But I know that from my experiences with middle school to high school students. So that is for everybody out there that is between ages 10 to 18. They're
Oh, for both.
adults. Okay, so this is why you're probably facing a lot of pushback, because for adult learners, I would say that, because when I used to tutor adults, a lot of the time they want to know the structure because that's how they were taught in school as well. I mean, that's how I was taught in school as well, that this is how you learn a language, that this is how you'll experience success. So, this is also still how a lot of students think. There is such a thing, because here's something that you'll experience as well, is that your stakeholders, if you're a teacher watching this, anybody who is working with parents or administrators and wants to move maybe away from the structure and wants to give students more input in class, more things to work with, more reading and more listening and less of the grammar. Even though grammar's not your enemy, it's just not the boat you all want to jump in. It's more like, maybe one of your towels on the back of the ship in case you get wet. Like, it's not what's going to get you there, but it's a helpful tool. So when people think that this very rigid, structured version of language teaching is what's going to get you there, don't fight them on it. Don't fight them on it. Here's what you do instead. If your students are asking about the structure of how language works, that's actually something that you can use in your favor. Give them a teeny tiny taste of it by explaining very specifically whatever structure they're asking about. So if your ESL students are, for example, asking about things like really common conversational phrases. And we were just talking about like ing verbs, like going, doing. And maybe they're asking the difference between, how do you say I do go to the grocery store, or I'm going to the grocery store? Like, how do you know the difference between when to say that? Like, how would a native speaker know when to say that? and you can explain it with the various rules. Like I'm honestly, I'm a native English speaker, so I wouldn't really be able to tell you in a good way, as we know. Like I don't really know the rules behind it. I just know that it sounds weird to say I do go to the grocery store when you're going out the door and you're about to leave. Like that sounds weird. But if you're talking about your daily habits of what you do every Saturday, it sounds very natural. So I can only put it in context. And so you can explain to them the rule very quickly and then immediately move into an activity where they're going to see that exact thing that they're asking about in context, and then ask them to identify it. For example, maybe you have a cool YouTube video that they can watch of people talking about their daily routines of, oh yeah, usually, I'm just spitballing here. Usually on Fridays, I hang out after work, I relax, I make dinner. But then on Saturday, I do go to the grocery store. Sometimes I go to this one, sometimes I go to that one, blah, blah, blah. Like people talking about their daily routines. Then you might give people the text from that YouTube video and ask them, why did they use I do instead of doing? Why did they do that? Ask them to talk about that. And then you give them a follow-up activity after that. If they feel like they're ready for it, don't force output, and say, okay, now it's time for you to talk about your daily routine. What do you do on Saturdays versus Fridays? And do the same thing that YouTube video just did. And you give them a couple example sentences to follow up with. To use as an example that they can kind of backtrack off of. Then you do the same thing with the same exact rule, but maybe different words, like go instead of going. And then they feel like they're getting both. Point of the story is that you don't fight them on, hey guys, we have to listen to this all the time. It's you can tell them what the rule is. If they're asking, of course, give them the explanation that they're looking for. But that, after 2 weeks of doing in context activities where it's mostly input instead of output, and mostly in context stuff instead of out of context, rule practice and drills, their practice will, their ability will speak for them. Like the fact that they're able to know the next time you give them any kind of practice or exam, and they know the difference a lot better, and maybe they're not even able to voice it. They're just like, oh, this one just feels right. Then you can revisit the conversation and say, okay, this next time when we're talking about something, the next section of your syllabus, we're going to jump right into input. We're going to jump right into reading. And I need you guys to trust me on this. Remember how well you did on that last exam? Trust me on this.
Yep. Yeah. I'll add to that because I teach adults as well. So that might help. Yeah. 1 second.
They're super demanding. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Kara, so much for
Thanks for
participating.
joining us.
I'll add to that a little bit, and you can listen to it afterwards. No worries, because the video stays there. And yeah, I want to add to that I teach adults, and I don't know what Kara's specific situation is, but the first thing that's really helped me the most is because I'm creating content like this exact conversation that we're having. I'm creating content around comprehensible input on YouTube. So I don't know if she's in the position to do that or she wants to do that at all. But that's saved me a lot of headaches because the people that I'm attracting, the people that are interested in my classes, they already know what I'm all about, what I'm all about, right? They know that I'm not going to give them grammar. They know I'm all about comprehensible input. So that's the first thing I'll do. If she ever consider that, or she wants to try that, it's going to help a lot, because like I said, if you're creating content around it and you're talking about the way you go about things, you're going to attract people that are interested in your approach from the get, right? So you don't need to do any convincing, which is amazing. That's first of all. But if the adults, I'm guessing Kara that she already has, right? So convinced. I always like to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing at the beginning, like before we start with stories or games or whatever we're using. I actually tell them why I believe in comprehensible input, what I think this is the way. So I do a lot of explaining before we start the classes, the actual classes, right? And you can also use examples like the one I just gave you about, English people not knowing what the rule is, or Spanish people. But for example, like I've got Spanish students for the most part. I mean, people who want to learn Spanish, but I've taught English as well. And so when I have students from Spain or from a Spanish-speaking country, I use an example that happens every single time, like with every single kid, which is that every single kid, a Spanish-speaking kid at the beginning, but to explain it, the word for broken in Spanish is roto, right? But it's irregular. So what happens here is every single Spanish-speaking kid says rompido at the beginning, which for those of you who don't know Spanish, that's in the incorrect word for broken, but it would be the regular conjugation. So what happens here is by listening to the language and from other examples like comer, comido, beber, bebido. So their brain, or the language mechanism in the brain, actually develops that language rule without having to consciously study it, which is key here, right? And then, of course, they learn the right word, and when they listen to it many times. But I think for Kara, it's going to help her that you can tell them that it's not that grammar is not important. That's usually what I tell my students. It's not that grammar is not important. The thing is, you don't need to consciously study it, right? So that way, first of all, it's true. And the second thing is, they feel like you care more about their journey, or about their learning experience, right? Because it's not that you just don't want to talk about grammar because you don't want to talk about it because that's what you believe in. It's just that, first of all, that's what you think is going to help them. You want the best for them, but also you understand that they want to communicate in the best possible way. We all do, of course, but consciously studying grammar is not going to get you there. That's what they need to understand. And then finally, there are some people who are just you're not going to convince. So that's that.
True. And I think that part of it too is our responsibility as language educators is that many of us have students who we are lucky enough that they come to us, they don't choose who their teacher is. Or if they're in an ESL program, a lot of them, like, they just get assigned a teacher a lot of the times. If they're in a language learning program that they get to pick, that's amazing. But a lot of the times, even if they do get to pick their teacher, they might not know that much about how language acquisition works. So it's our responsibility to not give them the whole dang spiel, like not tell them, give them a whole 4-week course on linguistics or second language acquisition, because they are not us. Okay. Only 2% of the world is us and loves to nerd out about language things. Most people come to our classes or come to our programs because they want the skill, they want the end result. So what we need to do is give the quick and dirty version of, I'm so excited that you're here to quote unquote learn a language. Like, you and I both know that it's acquisition, but at the end of the day, like, we're so excited that you're here to learn a language. However, we need to bust a couple myths. You've probably heard this about language learning. It actually works like this. You've probably heard or maybe experienced this in school, but it actually works like this. Like when I was teaching high school, I used to do a very quick 1-week unit where half of the class we would learn about what it means to acquire a language and what a language parent was, what a language student should do, and that their main responsibility in class was to listen, absorb, and let me know when they didn't understand what I was saying or what the people in the videos were saying or the people in the songs were saying. That was their job, was to be brave enough to raise their hand and say, je ne comprends pas. I don't understand what's going on. And that my job was to make them feel comfortable enough to be open and to listen and absorb. And that when they had questions, they felt comfortable enough to come to me. That was what we learned. And we did like a couple myths about what it meant to learn a language. So you could do that in your classes as well before you start.
Exactly.
This is what it means to learn a language.
Yeah. So you even over communicate at the beginning, so they know what. Yeah, like I said, so they know why you're doing what you're doing. Because I think that helps them as well. I mean, that helps everyone. Like, imagine you sign up for any type of class. If the teacher, tells you in advance what the whole thing is going to be about, why he or she is going to do the things that she's going to do, you're going to feel much better, right? And you're going to feel like the person knows what they're talking about.
Exactly.
Important.
So
right?
I just signed up for a couple months ago. You know how you can take classes online for anything? Like, the world is amazing that we live in this information age. I've always wanted to learn how to draw, but I've never really believed that I was very good at drawing or painting. I signed up for a class, on one of those websites where you can get classes. And the very first class I took was the basics of drawing. And the teacher explained, these are the myths that many people have about drawing. And one of them was that you need to have a lot of talent in order to be good at drawing. And because I always thought that, right? Like, you just have to be naturally gifted. So the teacher went through the whole idea, and everybody believes that about language, right? That you have to be naturally gifted at language. And we all, like us language learners, we know that that's not true. It's actually about dedication and patience and motivation. But the teacher went through and said, actually, drawing is much more about practice and about seeing the world in a new way and being brave enough to trust the process. It's like, well, this is perfect. This is actually, okay, cool. I'd be down for that. And I made a lot more progress than I ever would if I kept telling myself that, well, I'm just not a naturally gifted drawer. So the myth busting is an important thing to do, even if it's just a few quick ones.
Yeah, and otherwise you wouldn't understand why the teacher's asking you to repeat that. I'm just making it up, that circle so many times.
Drawing circles, yes, yeah. We drew circles for a long time, yes. And your students are going to have to do the same thing. They're going to have to repeat things over and over again. So
if you don't know why, you're like, well, the hell are we drawing circles here all the time?
Yeah, my circles look really good now, though.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the 2% thing that you said. I actually don't enjoy the grammar part, but I totally get what you're saying. Yeah.
There you go.
Only those who enjoy that part go on to become teachers afterwards, right? But no, I just have too many memories trying to learn English that way that I don't enjoy it now.
Yeah.
All right. Anything that we forgot to talk about? Anything that's on your mind?
Oh, I think that we hit so many good ones here, that there's a lot of different ways to experience language learning, that everybody has their own story to it, and that as you go through your life, there might be different stages that you go through with your relationship with language learning as well. But if you are in either of those phases with language teaching or learning, that the important thing to remember is that it's far less about equipping either yourself or your students with knowledge, and far more about just getting yourself off the bench and into the game, into as many real life situations or as close to it as you can. as many of them as you can, and in the right time. That's really what gets to be hard about it, is that, you never want to jump right into a high level conversation with you or your students, and that's just a complete disservice to everybody. That the art is in the right level at the right time.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and even yes, if you get to spark their interest, they, after your class, your course, or whatever it is, they they feel like just listening to stuff in Spanish or French or whatever it is. I'm just thinking about my own journey, and not just with languages, but for example, I remember philosophy being so boring in school, and now I love it. I look for philosophy videos myself all the time, or podcast, because I'm interested in the topic. But when you're told about, I mean, when teachers talk about philosophy, I'm talking the traditional way, in a way that you only need to memorize things in order to sort of, I don't know, take it all out on exam day and then just
Yeah.
forget about it. They're not gonna be interested in it. And
Mhm.
and it works for me. It works for philosophy. It works for languages. It works for history. The things that I'm super interested in right now, because I get to choose and pick whatever I want to watch, the way I want to watch it, because I'm genuinely interested in it. I don't have any exam to take that's gonna measure how much I know about it. Just for pure pleasure of learning about things that I'm interested in. It just it's life changing. I mean, like, that's the thing. Um, that I love the most, or one of the things I love the most in life, is learning new things. Right now, if you tell my that when I was in school, the what? It just it's the difference it makes. It's
Yeah, it definitely does.
all right. So yeah, before we get out of here, um, La Libre Language Learning is your
Mhm.
channel on YouTube as well, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it is.
So yeah, everyone watching this video, go check her out. For more tips on true language acquisition, true language teaching, what to do to help your students, or to learn languages yourself. And yeah, and your Facebook, but your Facebook audience is watching this live, right? So we'll
Yeah.
need to remind the channel, but La Libre Language Learning as well, right?
Yeah, y'all, thanks for coming by today and for having me here. My specialty is for helping teachers make their journey to teaching with a proficiency oriented scope a lot more practical, because as much as we have learned here today that it's really important, the piece where it really gets difficult is the day to day. So if you're a teacher of languages and you're trying to figure out, like, this is great and I loved this conversation and I want to learn more about how to actually do it on a day-to-day basis, that's what we talk about over at La Libre.
Right. Awesome. So yeah, thanks so much, Devon. It was a pleasure, and yeah, I'll get better at the technical aspects of it, because for the first 2-3 minutes that I was trying to set up my YouTube channel, I think I programmed an event or a video for 7 p.m. my time. But then when we get in through Restream to different platforms, it created a different video. So
Yeah.
I was thinking it's not working, and I saw there were some people waiting there. I hope they found their way here, because we created a different video. But anyway, as with everything in life, you get better with experience.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And Alvaro's brave enough to try things for the first time, as are all language learners. So we're living what we're trying to say here.
Yeah, I've been
Be brave and go
creating
do
a
things.
ton of videos, but not live. So, and I actually loved it, because you get to answer live questions, which is amazing. So
Yeah, that was
I
so
might do
fun.
this
Thanks
often,
for
more
coming,
often,
guys.
even like a solo episodes and so on. Yeah. Because
Yeah,
I saw
this is
you're
great.
doing it on Facebook, right?
Say that again.
That I saw you doing this on Facebook, like answering questions live, and it's fun actually. Yeah.
It is, yeah. Yeah, it's fun because then we get to hang out with the audience.
Perfect. All right. So thank you everyone for watching,
Thanks,
and
everyone.
yeah, feel free to contact us anytime with
Mhm.
whatever question you have related to language acquisition and language teaching, and yeah. All right.
Yeah, all that good stuff.
Bye bye.
Signing off.